Hello and welcome to another episode of the Multan Truth. I am your host, Zoey Michaels. We're here today with a very talented young man. His name is Zachary Hagan, and Zachary is another one of my authors. And we were just discussing some of his upcoming works. And I'll tell you, I've had a rough week. This week my dog died, and I am in the north, and it's cold weather, and my mind is not really where it should be today. So poor Zachary is kind of coming into this. So hopefully you, our audience, will forgive us, and poor Zachary will have a really wonderful interview despite everything. Zachary, thank you for joining us. So.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege, and what your audience may not know is that we rescheduled, and so I just want to thank you so much for your grace on that, and I'm just thrilled to
Well,
be
we're
here this
glad to
morning.
have you. So, we were talking a little bit about some of your upcoming work, but before we get there, maybe just give us a little bit of your background. Have you always been writing, or what stage in your life did you begin maybe tinkering with writing and then switch to taking it seriously and actually getting published?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in writing. Since I was a little kid, the two things that I wanted to be most in the world was an educator and a writer. And so my mother kept all these like stapled together stacks of papers that were half filled with the imaginings of a small child that were my first stories in a sense. Um, but I think when I really started taking it seriously, it was actually during my first year teaching, and I had about 10 to 12 chapters of a novel written that I had done for a creative writing class in college that I swore that I was going to come back to, but I didn't know if that was actually going to happen because life is busy, and a couple things kind of came together that gave me the opportunity to actually write that first book. Um, First, I had a student tell me that they had no plans on reading the Chronicles of Narnia because it was too old and they had no desire to read it, and that hurt me on a spiritual level. So I decided that we needed that the book that I had started writing was sort of allegorical to the life of Christ, but set in a fantasy world, much like um, the first book that was written in the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so I knew that that had become a larger priority, but I still didn't have that much time to write it because I was, of course, a full time first year teacher. And then what turned out to be a good thing was that I was actually fired from that
Oh,
job. Yeah, the political climate was such that, and I was very ignorant to this. I was 24 years old. I had been so engrossed in my studies that I didn't know that there was any sort of issue with what I was doing. I gave my class a writing prompt one morning, and I had them try to imagine what it would be like to live as the opposite gender. And I was working in a private Christian
oh,
school at the time, and so that was a big no-no to the parents. And of course, I had no idea what landmine I was stepping into because I didn't know anything about the transgender debate that had been going on. I knew nothing about it because I just didn't pay attention to politics
right.
at
You were just
all.
thinking purely from a creative
um,
angle and maybe
yeah,
sensitivity,
from a
maybe.
creative angle, and also because I had some boys that really needed to learn some empathy because they were being
Mm.
rude to my girls, and we were about to start reading I Am Malala, and I'm like, okay, we need this background and some perspective to where we can treat our female classmates with some respect because they are due that as human beings. And so that was my full intention, but it did not go over well with a few parents. And so I was let go. um, but because I had a contract, they were obligated to pay out the rest of my contract. So I essentially had my full pay until the end of June. And I said, well, I could sit here doing nothing and feeling sorry for myself, or I could write this book. So I wrote the book, and it became clear that it was a bigger story than one book. And I thought, well, maybe a trilogy. But as I was kind of plotting the trilogy, I'm like, no, this feels like a 5 act arc. And so that's where Eternal Chronicles really came from, was I lost my job and needed something to do. So I did.
So talk about, they talk about that the expression life handing you lemons and making lemonade. That was just the right way to handle that. I mean, that was basically, yeah, that stinks that you lost your job, but in a way that was such a gift because then you had the time and the resources to explore that passion. I mean, and what a wonderful way to use that gift that was unexpectedly given to you. Um,
Yes. And, I went back into teaching and I've been teaching since then. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that it's good to stay informed
Yes, I would
because
say so.
so I keep up to date with politics not because I find it entertaining, but I'm like, okay, let's find the anthills before I start
Right.
them
Yeah.
down.
And you know about ant hills. You live in fire ant land.
Yes.
So, yeah. Oof. Yeah. And that never would have occurred to me. And my grandfather was a school teacher, but he did math, so I don't think he had to worry as much about those explosions in math or the politics back in the
Hmm.
70s and 80s that we do now in this present time. I can't even imagine. Can you imagine 50 plus years ago if they had to deal with the kind of stuff that we have to deal with and what that would have looked like? I mean, times were difficult enough, just like with mothers against drunk driving, students against drunk driving type of changes. But you were gonna say something. You were getting ready to, and I was still kind of mid thought. But
I don't know. No, I think in some ways, we compare our times to what was past or things like that. But each generation has its own struggles, and we adapt and we deal with it, and then we are shocked that people are able to deal with something else down the road. But humanity is so resilient. I think as long as we keep reading, that we're probably going to be okay. But that's sort of the linchpin. I think that we need
yeah,
to keep reading and read widely and read other people's opinions, even if you don't agree with
you're
them.
so right about that. Being informed and being, you know, people sit and they let other people form their opinions for them. And that's the thing
Hmm.
about reading versus just sitting and watching, whether it's videos on YouTube, watching television. When you're doing things that are just, I don't know if I can think of the right word, where you are simply there and things are being done for you versus reading. Reading requires effort, it requires thought, it requires use of your imagination, it requires thinking ability, whereas the others do not require thinking ability. Um, you know,
Hmm.
I, I've seen it expressed before, and I completely agree that if you raise someone to read, you raise someone who to think, and that's why it's so important.
Absolutely. That's why we have a huge emphasis on books with our son. Even now, he's 7 months old, but um, unless he's really putting up a fight and is overtired, every night we read him.
Yeah. See, that's such a wonderful thing. It's funny you say that, and there was a point recently when I was going through some of my old belongings, and I guess I was in a sentimental mood. But I was looking back at some old report cards, and like the first ones, like when you're in kindergarten, when they had a lot more commentary. And one of the things I discovered, I didn't really know, but one of my best memories was that my dad would always read to myself and my two younger brothers, but I didn't know that that wasn't always a thing. That's the thing about childhood. You don't really remember too far back, but you have that one strong memory. It turns out the reason
Hmm.
my dad was reading to us was that because of that report card. I was struggling in school, apparently, and they said, hey, you need to start reading out loud to your daughter to help her strengthen that. And so that began that family night of let's read to Zoe and her brothers, and that was what taught me to read, because that was the goal. It was to teach me to recognize the alphabet and teach me to recognize words. Um, and my brothers would always pick the same story over and over again. They had a favorite. It wasn't my favorite, but it was their favorite. But I knew that story backwards and forwards. I had it memorized. And from that story, I learned to pick out the words and then read the stories I did like. The teacher's advice did work, and it created a very nice memory for me. So, thank you to those teachers.
Yeah. Reading out loud is a wonderful thing. It's why I start most of my classes with a read aloud. 10 minutes we choose a book, and actually, um, this year my students chose my first book to start with, so I've been reading
Oh,
them my books,
nice. Well,
which has been fun.
yeah. Well, how cool that, first of all, they get to read the first 10 minutes of the class, and second of all, they know the author. I mean, how many of us get to say that? Um,
Not a whole
no,
lot. So it's been a fun
absolutely.
experience.
What age group do you teach, if I'm allowed to ask?
Oh, sure. So it's kind of a unique situation because we're a relatively small school. We have just over 60 students, but we have departmentalized the third through the eighth grade. So I teach all of the language arts and a music class to the third through
Okay,
eighth grade
very
students.
cool. So that coincides with like some of my memories. Like I'll never forget the teacher in my fourth grade class who would read to us out loud this book series, back when the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew mysteries were popular. He
Mm-hmm.
pulled out a mystery series no one had ever heard of, and probably still have never heard of, called the Three Investigators Mysteries, and I still love them, but they're obscure. No one knows them. Um, so then, this age group that you teach, are they also the inspiration for the books that you're writing?
I would say no, and the reason being, when I started writing the books, it was more, I mean, maybe towards the upper end of it because it's definitely young adult. I don't I don't read my books to the third and
Mhm.
fourth grade students because they're a little
Okay,
violent
okay.
for them. And, I'm not shy about violence, but I think at certain points it can be gratuitous if it's in the
Hmm.
wrong age group. Some are able to handle it and understand, that's how the world works. And with a book with conquest and political intrigue and war, that's integral to the story. I don't stick it in just to put it there, but not every story is for everyone, so I'm selective with who I
Yeah,
recommend
that's
it
good.
to. Um, but no, I would say because when I started writing, I was in college, and most of the students that I was working at that point, because I was doing internships with area schools, were mostly older teenagers towards sophomores, juniors, seniors. And so that was really like kind of like my core audience, my core demographic for that. Um, so the characters are a little bit older, um, and the themes are pretty mature. So I think you have to have sort of enough of a background in life to get that things aren't always perfect, but we can keep soldiering on and things get better. But it's because we are putting our faith in something bigger and we keep walking, we don't
Yeah,
sit still.
absolutely. So, out of what you've written so far, do you have a favorite? Like a favorite book or a favorite character?
I think, oftentimes my favorite book is the one that I've just finished. So I do have a special place in my heart right now for Aisha's Secret. Will it end up being my favorite 20 years from now? I don't know. Um, I think what has continued to kind of be my enduring favorite of my first series was Eternity's Mirror, just because I think that's where the series really came into its own and a lot of the exciting parts of the plot started to become known. Because the first book is one long introduction to the world, in a sense. A lot of the reviews that have gotten rightly point out that the first five or so chapters are a bit of a slog, and I don't disagree. It's necessary to get the story going. Um, and when you're dealing with a multiple part series, you should expect somewhat of a slog in the beginning, I think, because there's so much building that needs to take place just so that you have a basic understanding of the world. And the world building continues throughout, of course, but I think because so much of that had been done in the first book, um, Eternity's Mirror became a lot more fun to write because I could really focus on the characters and what was happening from the very beginning. And so the second book picks up right literally seconds after the first book ends, and it continues that story without the need for this country is there and this person is this. And so they're definitely not standalone books. I had someone give me a review that read the fourth book without having read any of the others. And I responded like, please go back and read. Like, I think you'll have a different opinion. It wasn't a bad review. It just
Yeah.
was, they were confused in the beginning. I'm like, yes, you were confused because there are three books
Yeah.
previous that you need. It's not like I know a lot of romance authors will write a series of books that are kind of loosely related,
It's not the same
but you
thing.
don't have to read them. It's not the
Mm.
same. Um, I think Aisha's Secret will probably fall into that because it's definitely a fantasy romance, but I don't plan on continuing Aisha's and Aladdin's story further. But I will probably write more books in that
Yeah.
world.
Well, it sounds really cool. And just the whole idea. Do you want to? I don't want to spoil things for the audience, but I love the description you had on your website about what you were doing with Aisha and Aladdin. Do you want to be the one to clue in the audience that kind of like what that whole thing is without me giving away anything?
Sure. So Aisha is a thief called the Oiled Hand, and she steals to live. She steals to keep her home. She's taking care of her and her little dog, and while she wants more, she doesn't quite know how to get it. And one day, her landlord kind of puts two and two together that she might be a thief because she's always missing whenever there's a big heist that happens. And so he says, you either pay me this much, 6,000 denarii, or you are out. And she has no idea how she's going to get that. She sells the few precious belongings that she has, but it's not nearly enough money. And she hears about this caravan of merchants with a lot of rare things that might be the ticket to saving the home that she shared with her late mother. And one of the things that she steals is a bottle with a gin trapped inside of it. Well, of course, she releases the gin, she makes a couple wishes, but that third wish happens after the money not being accepted to stay in her home. And she reminisces, thinking back to her childhood playmate Aladdin when her mother was the seamstress for the Sultana, and wishes for that life. She wishes to be a princess. And of course, Jinn magic being what it is, takes the easiest path, and so rather than create a whole new kingdom for her to be princess of, she takes Aladdin's place, and she has to keep that secret of who she really is, or the spell breaks and she loses everything.
Very cool. Very cool storyline. Yeah. Just out of nowhere. No one else I think would have ever imagined such a twist on the whole idea of Aladdin and going that direction. I kind of look forward to looking at that book one of these days, and I'll just have to add it to my wish
It's on
list.
pre-order on Amazon now, so if anyone's interested, it's there. If you prefer a physical copy, wait for February 24 is when it
Very
comes
cool.
out, and you can grab a hardback or a paperback
Very
copy.
cool. Now, where, like, how did you come up with this idea? What was the inspiration for this story?
I should have written down their username, but I believe I was on a live when I was still pretty active on TikTok. I'm trying to get back into the social media thing. I took a long hiatus because my students found my account and I didn't know how to
Boy.
interact with it without or with that being an issue because a bunch of them started following and I'm like, I don't know how to handle this.
Mm,
So I'm trying to get back into it now that I'm a little bit more social media savvy. But I was on a live and I got the idea from someone there, and I should have written down their usernames so that I could put them in the dedication. But they actually kind of had this initial question, like, what if Jasmine was the thief? And I took that initial question, and just kind of ran
yeah.
with it. What if I couldn't use Jasmine because then I'm on copyright
Right. I
infringement?
get you.
I can retell an Aladdin story just fine because 1001 Arabian Nights is old enough that I don't need to worry about copyright infringement at all. But so I adapted the idea from there, and I had a lot of fun creating the characters and the plot line, and a couple of the characters leave things open for more books down the line. I'm actually planning. Aisha meets an aunt of Aladdin's during her time in the courts, and that character is likely to make an appearance or be a main character in a Cinderella retelling that I'm
Ah,
thinking, that I'm putting
very
together.
cool. See, and I love that you found a way to again, these stories are old enough that there's no copyright issue. I have these ideas for a story that kind of inspired by the idea of the whole Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler, Scarlet, and the child that they had, the second child that they had actually in the Scarlet book. But I think that's just too recent. I think I would be in danger of copyright. So I'm like, how do I get around this? How do I tell a story without breaking copyright laws? So I love that you found, older stories that you could do that without having that concern.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it's like it was 75 years at one point. I had to study copyright law, and of course, Mickey Mouse came along and made it so that copyright is extended
Oh
forever.
boy. Ugh.
It seems. I'm a Disney fan. I say this with all the love in my heart for the wonderful things Disney, the man, maybe to a lesser extent the
Hmm.
company, has
Yeah,
created. um, so I appreciate that they wanted to protect Mickey Mouse and that
I
legacy. At
get
the same
that.
time, it's like there's a lot of creativity that comes from being able um, to take works and turn them into
Well,
something new.
exactly. I mean, you're totally there's new stories, new things branching off that suddenly don't get to be told because of those laws. Again, definitely
Hmm.
protect it, sure, but also provide an avenue that, hey, here's this, let's add because people want new and fresh stories. I don't know about you, but I am so tired of seeing the same movie remade over and over and over again. It's like, yeah, you've done this movie twice now. Could we have something fresh?
Yeah. Well, that's why Hallmark is a meme now rather than something. I mean, I know there are people who will sit down and watch a
Yeah.
Hallmark movie. I think I watched two or three before I realized I could watch one and have seen
Yeah.
them all.
Yeah.
So,
And not that I mind watching a Hallmark movie, and sometimes I will watch literally the same one, once a year or multiple years in a row. But
mhm.
I don't want to go to a movie, a remake of a movie that I've already seen. That to me is such a waste. You made this in a cartoon form.
Especially if they're not inventing anything new with it.
Exactly. Exactly. What's the point? At that point, just make it a stage play. Then it's expected. It's not going to be original.
Right. Well, I think of the ABC series Once Upon a Time and how they kind of revisited a lot of those old Disney um, IPs, but the story was
Hmm.
brand new, even though it revisited the fairy tales
Yeah,
as they were kind of originally thought of or as they were Disneyfied. Um, and that was an entertaining series to a point. At a point, it got stale. But especially in the beginning, it was a very original idea and it was very entertaining and I loved it. I watched the whole thing. I don't love the later seasons, but I did enjoy, I think, especially through season 5 or 6. I think it was 6 that had the grand finale to what I would consider the main part of the story. But that took those ideas and gave them a fresh coat of paint, a new kind of multiverse of fairy tales and characters that all coexisted in one world and then in another. So,
exactly.
but that's different from a remake. We may retrace some of the old steps, but we are taking branching paths and um, figuring out different questions that were never
Exactly.
asked in the originals.
Exactly. If you can do something original with it, for instance, you take your classic Cinderella and, you go Jerry Lewis's route and you do Cinderfella. Original, different, cool. Or, what's her name? Drew Barrymore with Ever After. Different slant. It
Love
was
that
very well done.
one.
It was not your typical Cinderella story. It was a different angle. Still the basic story, but just a very different angle. That I can respect. But when you're doing the same stale story, like you said, it's like, what's the point? And you know, that's where you
hmm
have to give.
No one wants
Yeah,
the
yeah. Go ahead, please. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no one wants to reread or rewatch the exact same thing
Yeah,
again.
and why would
You
you?
know, I think of, you know, and I think of, oh, what was it? There was a Cinderella story that Hilary Duff was in at one point, and I thought that was quite good when it came out. It gave it a modern kind of spin. It's set in high school, so it appealed to me. At that time, I was pretty young when it came out. Um, But then there was a Selena Gomez,
Oh,
another
now
Cinderella
that one was
story,
good. I
and I'm
liked
like,
that one with the music.
it it was good, but I almost felt like when you gave it a title like that, it's almost like, are you asking people not to watch it because it feels like you're legitimately saying, "Let me do this again."
Now that's fair.
You could have given it any other title.
That's a very fair, case. They maybe should have given it a different title. Yeah, maybe a rock and
hmm
roll
It's almost
Cinderella
like
or
they,
something.
yeah, something like that, because it was better, I think, than the title let
Hmm.
on. And had they given it a different title, it might have come out of the shadow of a Cinderella story with Hilary Duff. Because if I'm looking for that, the Hilary Duff one is always going to be the one that I pull up. But and there's choices with titles. There's choices with a lot of different things, and it's this really delicate balance, almost of
Hmm.
psychology in figuring out what people actually want. Because of course, similar stories will resonate because you are hitting on nostalgia. But if Well, a lot of people really enjoy Uncrustables, for example. It's familiar, it's very childlike food,
Hmm.
it's gonna feel pretty
Yeah.
good to eat. But, I'm 29. Do I want a Smucker's Uncrustable or do I want something a little bit more dressed up and that maybe has some excitement? Like maybe the bread is toasted. after the sandwich is put together, maybe it's almond butter or cashew butter rather than peanut
Right.
butter, and something a little bit more exciting than grape or strawberry jelly, and maybe has some actual chunks of fruit in it or something like that. Add a savory element or something like that. Like, oh, I don't know, pretzels or something like that to have some crunch or something. But there's lots of different ways that you can reinvent something simple to where it's going to be more interesting and is going to be more appealing than just making the same thing with a different label on it.
Exactly. Take it from Cinderella, the title, to Cinderella, maybe the genre. You know, you know,
Mm-hmm.
put a whole different, unique story, twist, title, but definitely make it fresh. Same thing with your Beauty and the Beast and
Mm-hmm.
all these others that are, that's the thing. Walt Disney, he went to Europe. He went searching for fresh stories. He did it the way that really it should be done. He went looking for fresh stories. But after that, the people who came behind him, there were some who still looked for fresh stories. I'll be fair. There's the occasional fresh story. I mean, you've got your Moana, you've got your, I don't know what else. I can't think that clearly this morning. There were some fresh stories.
Princess and the Frog was really well done.
Okay.
Princess and the Frog was extremely well done. I loved that.
So, we've got the occasional fresh story, but it feels like the last 5, 10, 15 years is when they have focused on remaking the old stories. And that's
Yes.
about, regaining the younger audience, maybe. But again, if you're going to do it, put a new slant. Don't just create the exact same thing just with real life people. Give it a facelift, give it a new angle, a new story. Because otherwise, what's the point? Just re-release
Mm-hmm.
it and send it back out to the theaters because it's the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah. And more than just increasing diversity, because as a Latino myself, I don't want just a Latina Snow White. I want a real Latin original story. Like I loved Encanto because it felt very relatable. The characters felt fresh to
Mhm.
me. I saw myself a lot in, or saw my family a lot in the, oh, and I'm forgetting their names now, um, in Mirabel's family. And so I really quite enjoyed that film. Um, but it was because it was a new story. It wasn't, okay, well, let's just make, and it's not anything against diversity because clearly that's important to
Yeah,
me. I've made an effort to include that in my books. But it is about, I don't think that anyone honestly wants to just be put into a European story that isn't already a part of that. I think that new stories and in stories indigenous to people groups deserve to be told.
absolutely. And they're out there. There's so much history to dig into and fresh stories to be found. They just have to go and find them. Or even right here in our backyard, there are authors coming up with
Mm-hmm.
new and fresh ideas. Look at those. Look at the indie authors. Look at these authors who have
Mm-hmm.
put the stories out there. They're there. And it's just about check them out because there may be some really great material. So instead of the same old, here's this fresh new angle. Let's go there. So, for
Absolutely.
example,
And
Aisha's
there are, I
Secret.
think that indie and self-published authors are slept on.
Oh, I'm sure. Just like the indie musicians, the same thing. They don't get as much love as the ones that have been herded through the professional gates of whatever. You know, and it's sad that it's that
Yes, and
way.
oftentimes yeah, I will say it can be hit or miss with indie writing just because it's so easy to self-publish. Um, But there are writers, myself included, because my imprint is not big enough, because I own my own publishing company. We're not big enough to do our own printing or to do things without the help of Amazon at this point. But, we still take the time to edit. We crowd test our well, right now it's just my books because we haven't signed anyone else, but we crowd test my covers and editing is done. Those professional steps are taken. Not every indie author does that, or not every self-published author does that. So sometimes it can be like weeding through a haystack to find the needle, to find just a book that's really well done, but it's not impossible. There are authors that take their craft and the publication process very seriously, and there are really well done works out
So,
there. I hope that I can include mine in that. I would say, objectively, I would like to say that they are, but it feels a little bit prideful to say that mine are in that
well,
category.
it's just confidence.
I think the reviews speak for themselves. I get very few bad reviews, so I'm going to hang my hat on that, on the validation that strangers have given to the books.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll even go so far to say, okay, sure, even if an indie writer may not have gone through the steps of the degree of editing they should do, or the book cover part, if they still had a really strong idea, a team of writers can run with a strong idea. Sometimes it's enough that there's a strong idea to work with, you know?
Absolutely. And those strong ideas, and really, if an indie author's work was going to be picked up, part of their negotiation could be, okay, if this is going to be popular, if we're going to market it as a movie, let's get this book professionally
Yeah,
edited so that
exactly.
it's going to flow the way that it needs to. So that those things can be fixed. The nice thing about self-publishing is that, whatever's
Hmm.
printed, you can't take back and remake, but digital copies, if you update the source
Hmm.
file, it's going to update everyone's copy on the digital platforms. So I wish that we could contact people who bought the books and give them updated
Wouldn't
copies,
that be
because I think
nice?
that there were like 3 copies of one of my books that went out that somehow like 5 or 7 chapters got deleted from
Ooh,
in the PDF, and I have no idea how that
right.
happened. But I have no idea who they are. So I just had like 3 books that went out that were missing chapters, and I wish I knew who those people were so that I could send them free
But
copies.
from a collection standpoint, let's say one day that you reached a certain level of, hey, this guy is like notable, right? Those ones with flaws could be worth some serious money. So, from that
Potentially.
perspective,
And there was a first edition of
yeah, there was a first edition of.
There was a first edition of Eternity as well with a completely different cover. So those are now relatively rare because there were only sixty, about 60 of those printed.
Yeah, very cool.
So that's going to be a completely different look.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about like the publishing side of things. So right now you're only working with your own book. Do you have plans to expand to help other authors? What's your plans where that's concerned?
That's the idea eventually. It can take quite a bit of time, of course, to build up enough of a readership to where things are kind of monetarily flowing. And so right now that's the goal, is to build things up enough to where the books have paid for themselves. Right now they have not done that
Hmm.
yet, which is fine. I'm okay with that. Because it is a bit of a long game. A lot of authors will kind of stick to this. I think it's like 20 to 50K, where it takes about 20 books in the self-publishing and indie kind of space before there's enough proliferation to where people will read and then binge read, because readers now do the same thing that people who watch a lot of TV do, and they binge series. So, for example, I know that now that Eternal Chronicles is done, there's no more being added to it. I'm much more likely to see people buy the entire series and read through it in rapid succession than I was to see people buy on opening day for each of those books.
Right.
Just just from a standpoint, they still need to be advertised, but um, people like being able to pick up a whole series and read it, because I know if I like the concept for a series, and this is even for me, if I like the concept for a series, I'm more than happy to read it. But I'll tell you what, I enjoyed reading the Hunger Games trilogy so much more because when I came to it, all three books were already
True.
out.
Yeah, because when you finish, you're
Whereas
eager to
with the
read the
Inheritance
next.
cycle, yeah. hmm But with the Inheritance cycle, those books are so long. And it takes Christopher Paolini years to write a book, which is fine. I think Inheritance was like 848 pages or something like that. I started reading those books when I was like in fourth grade, and the last book in the series didn't come out until I was a sophomore in high school. And so I read them as they came out, but it was kind of frustrating waiting for them. So binge reading is a thing. So the more books that an author has out, the better. Because if a reader finds out, oh, I really like reading them, they'll read all of them. And so if you make one sale, you'll make as many sales as there are on your catalog. But really having 20 or more books in the catalog is going to be better because people will then read 4, 5, 6, 7 books out of how many you've written, and they'll tell their friends that they really enjoyed that author, and those will read the same amount or some more. And so I'm kind of in a race in a way to get to that 20 book
Yeah.
mark, um, so that I can then do that. This might not be something that happens until I'm around 40, and that's fine. I have other ways of making a living. Um, and I've never seen writing as something that's going to completely replace my income. If it does, fantastic. I will take
Right.
it.
Yes.
But I'll take it. But eventually, I'd like to work with other authors and hire more staff than we currently have. Because right now, it's like 90% me, like 5% freelance, and then 5% people that are regularly helping and volunteering with things like beta reading and things like that.
Exactly. Well,
So,
I have to say, just based on my own experience, as an indie author, it's difficult to know who to trust. It's difficult to know, who out there is legitimate as far as your beta readers, as far as trying to find a way to get reviews, because without reviews, people won't even give your book the time of day on Amazon. So trying to navigate that as an indie author is such a huge challenge. I got for all practical purposes, we'll call it mugged. I got mugged like right out the gate when I first published my first couple of books, and so I just almost have zero trust. And outside of the guy who referred you to me for the podcast, I have like zero trust in
right.
anyone involved, and I just stick with my own little circle of friends. I'm like, hey, can you read this? Can you, if you like it, can you post a review? Because I don't know who to turn to anymore. Because the times I have hired quote unquote professionals, I have gotten mugged every single time. So I'm still out there as an indie going, who out there is legitimate? Who's trustworthy? So
Yeah, I'm so sorry you had that experience. I loved the first editor that I worked with because when I first started out, I didn't know the process
yeah,
for editing. Um, so I can email you her name if you ever need an editor or
do
want to work with
that
someone.
because I would love some credible, reliable information. Because seriously, everyone who's ever reached out to me, I feel like had an agenda. Their goal was not. I'm gonna say they just was not
Yeah,
was not pure. And while they did do some work, like I got some really beautiful cover art, I looked at like the editing and went, I did more editing than you did, and I still find things that I'm still correcting. So what did you do? What did I pay you for? So yeah, I just felt like,
Yeah, and it depends, of course, on what type of editing you pay for
yeah,
as well.
yeah. They couldn't even explain
So
what
if
they.
it's proofreading, they should be fine with all those
Yeah.
mistakes.
So I
Yeah.
just was not pleased.
So, and the editor that I worked with for my first couple books does explain all that, exactly what she's doing. Like she didn't proofread for me because I could do that just fine on my own. But she did help me a lot with developmental editing, and I think as a young writer, and she can do proofreading and stuff like that too. But when I first started out, it really was a lot of this. I wrote 80 plus thousand words. How do I make sure they're all cohesive and fitting
Right.
together? And so she helped me a lot with that.
Absolutely. Well, and then again, how do you go about legitimately getting reviews without breaking Amazon rules? Because they have to be these independent things that you don't pay for. So how do you get people to read the book and get reviews other than saying at the end of the story, "Hey, if you liked the book, please leave a review here." Do you have any suggestions, tips, tricks, or is that something offline?
Um, you know, I think that having a publicist has really helped with
Mhm.
that. I started getting a lot more reviews. It's still not like an
Mhm.
onslaught
Mhm.
of them, but again, it's writing is a
Yeah.
long game because the market's so saturated. You have to become a prolific enough voice in the space to really get um, trajectory there. But I did start getting a lot more reviews once I hired a publicist, and plus it's a lot of fun because I get to do things like this because I wouldn't have otherwise been able to make this kind of connection. Hmm. Yeah. Oh, okay. Sure. Okay, so there was a technical error, and Zoe's going to be right back on. It stopped recording her for some reason, so she will be right back with us. So hopefully you guys are enjoying it so far. I know I'm enjoying the conversation. I've never had to fill time on these with by myself. She edited it. So she's there. All right. All right. Now it's
There we
recording you
go.
again.
Good. Okay. So hopefully you can hear me again. So we had just a little hiccup with the recording studio, and
Check
that
your
happens
microphone.
sometimes. Oh, can you hear me?
You want to check your microphone? I couldn't hear
Can
you. Let me check my
Can you
sound.
hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. Yep, that's Riverside. It's a little quirky sometimes. It still does good quality, but anyway. So yeah, I appreciate that feedback. So yeah, Mickey at Creative Edge. I'll have to talk to him one of these days about using his services because, like I said, he's one of the few reliable people that I do know. So I'm glad he sent you my
Yeah,
direction.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
he's a great guy. I've referred a couple people to him.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the thing I have to say is that everyone he has sent me have been these wonderful, really successful, very well grounded authors and musicians, a little bit of both. But all of his clients I've spoken with have been very happy with his services, and that to me speaks volumes. Just the number of happy clients I've spoken with. To me, that's better than any other approach I've gotten, because he's not approached me at all to get my business. It's all been about, hey, these are the clients who need to have an interview on my podcast, which is great. Um, so, as we get ready to wind down and we get down to the random questions, do you have anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we go into the random questions?
I think just that I hope that you have enjoyed the interview, and that if you enjoyed it, that you'll join part of my audience as well. I would love to have you guys read my books and join me for what comes next. Eternal Chronicles was a great series. That's a 5 book. It's very bingeable. I think you could probably knock it out in a couple weeks if you really wanted to. So, good little end of the year treat to sink your teeth into. And get ready for Aisha's Secret in February.
Are any of your books on Audible, or are they only just download and read?
Actually, the first book, Eternity's Well, is on Audible. I plan on having the other ones done, but that's an expensive process if you want it done with a real human
Yes,
voice,
it
which I
is.
do. I'll have AI do some stuff for me. I'm not afraid of it, but I think when it comes to reading a book and anything that takes true artistry, I'm not going to let the computer do that for me. I'm going to be hiring the same actor. And so I need a
Absolutely.
little bit more money and some more sales to get there, but I am more than happy to continue that process.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I mean, it's an expense either way, whether it's AI or a human, but by all means, the quality does show. You get the right person vocalizing and telling that story, and it's amazing what you can,
Hmm.
how that story just sings.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the question left by our previous guest, um, she asked the question: if you were going to write your own personal Declaration of Independence, what would it be?
Oh, goodness. That's such an interesting question. I think that in many ways, I would declare independence from the global system and want to go back to what we understood from our history classes, the founding principles of America to be. I think that being involved in the world is one thing, but letting the rest of the globe take an active part in American politics is detrimental in a lot of ways. And it's divided us further. I think that we as Americans have a lot more in common than we have that separates us, but we've lost sight of that because of issues overseas, you know. So I think that I would want to declare some independence from that and to find a way to come back together as a nation.
Okay, already. Her other thing was to make a mission statement, but that was more about personal goals. But yeah, very
Well,
cool.
mission statements are, I guess the Declaration of Independence reads as inherently political to me, so I took it as that. A mission
Yeah,
statement, I
no
think,
worries.
is different. um,
Well, that's why I was
an
trying to
interesting
emphasize the
question either
personal
way.
part.
Okay, personal. Personal. I don't know. I think that that one's a little harder for me to answer just because I feel very free as a person. I don't feel like I'm tied to anything other than what I've chosen to tie myself to: my faith, my family, the career path that I've chosen, and a lot of it's still just up to me. If I don't want to do what I'm doing anymore, I don't have to. So I feel like my Declaration of Independence kind of personally has already been written.
And that's completely fair. You're doing what you love to do already, and yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that's the case. You know, sometimes this question sometimes simply doesn't fit, but that's okay. We still
It's a
ask the
good
question.
question. It's
Yeah.
a good question. I might
Maybe
actually
use it for
ask
your
my
class.
students that question. Yeah, it's a great question. I like the question.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel free, so I'm glad that the question doesn't necessarily apply to me because it kind of reveals that I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
But it's a good
And
question.
nothing wrong with that. Sometimes that's it. Yeah. Sometimes it's nice when the question doesn't apply to you because exactly that. Because, like, oh, I'm doing better than I thought I was doing. Check, check, check. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Okay. So a
Now,
random question of
mhm.
my own to lead then.
Yeah.
Um, where in your personal journey would you start over from if you could, and why?
Where in your personal journey would you start over from? You start over from, and why? That's an excellent question. I'm looking forward to asking that from the next guest. All right. So as we close out, I do just want to make sure that we touch on this for our audience. Zachary does have a website. It is zacharyhagenwrites.com. So at no point in our broadcast did we ever mention that website, but I wanted to make sure we did hit on that. As you know, my website is zoeymichaels.com. We thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a beautiful, beautiful day. And as we close out 2025, hopefully 2026 will be a very bright and beautiful and productive year for us all. All right, Zachary, thank you so much for joining us. Hang tight. I've got more information for you after we stop recording.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me.